The House will be in order. The clerk will unlock the machine and the members will record their presence. Has every member recorded his presence? The clerk will lock the machine and record the roll. The roll call shows 47 present, 23 absent, excused, a quorum being present. The House is ready for business. Prior to going at recess, the House was at the 11th order. The House is at the 11th order. Gentleman from 14.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent the remaining bills on the third reading calendar hold their place one legislative day.
You've all heard the unanimous consent request. Is there an objection? Hearing none, the remaining bills on the third reading calendar will hold their place for one legislative day. The House will now return to the seventh order of business. Motions, memorials, and resolutions. The House is at the seventh order. Gentleman from 14.
Mr. Speaker, point of personal privilege.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the House, it's our intention to do all these bills on the suspension calendar, the yellow sheet. So as soon as we get those done, we'll call it a day. We're not going to start at the top. We've got some committees that are still meeting, and so we're going to start with one that's going to take a little bit of debate, and that's House Concurrent Resolution 22. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I move that all rules interfering with the immediate consideration of House Concurrent Resolution number 22 be suspended, making possible the immediate consideration of House Concurrent Resolution number 22.
Mr. Speaker, I second that motion.
You've all heard the motion. The motion for suspension rules requires 47 votes for passage. The clerk will unlock the machine and members will cast their votes. Barely. Has every member voted?
47.
Does any member wish to change his vote? The clerk will lock the machine and record the roll. The roll call shows 48 aye, 0 nay, 22 absent, excused. More than 47 have, more than two-thirds of having voted in the affirmative. The rules are suspended, and the House will have under consideration House Concurrent Resolution number 30. The House will be at ease. HCR 20? All right.
Take some big breaths. Is the speaker going to
House will be in order. House will have before it House Concurrent Resolution 22. Good gentleman from 9.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to dispense with further reading of House Concurrent Resolution 22.
Unanimous consent has been requested. Is there objection? Hearing none, the good gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen. Idaho, the West, and the nation as a whole are at a crossroad with respect to ownership and management of the public lands. Reexamination of public lands policy has become an economic, education, resource stewardship, and employment imperative. We can continue on the present path of economic inefficiency and bureaucratic dysfunction in which the public lands deteriorate, or we can, through careful examination and good faith discussion, develop a new model for public land management. A model that restores forest and range lands, promotes the responsible development of mineral and energy resources, enhances the economy at all levels, and also ensures that those public lands of greatest scenic and natural beauty are forever protected for the enjoyment of all. Legal justification for the transfer of public lands into state ownership is based on the history of federal land policy. From the inception of this nation, through much of its history, it was the policy of the federal government to dispose of the public lands, both to pay off federal debt and to encourage the settlement of the western lands for the benefit of both the states and the nation. Indeed, most of the states east of the Colorado-Kansas state line have very little federal land within their borders as a result of the historical implementation of this policy. This policy of disposal was very much a part of the various enabling acts that authorized new states to join the Union. Idaho's Admission Act and Constitution disclaimed title and agreed to refrain from taxing the public lands until the title thereto shall have been extinguished by the United States. Significantly, these terms for disposal of the public lands in Idaho's Admission Act and Constitution are the same terms found in the enabling acts for many of the states east of Colorado, where the federal government carried out the disposal of the public lands. This disclaimer of title was only intended to facilitate the disposal of the public lands so that eventually such lands would contribute to the revenue base of all levels of government. The required disposal of the public lands by the United States over time was a significant benefit of the bargain made with the state of Idaho with the federal government at the time of statehood. In addition to the future expectation of taxable lands, Idaho was also promised 5% of the proceeds from the sale of the public lands held by the federal government, which shall be sold. Following statehood, the subsequent and unilateral termination of the disposal policy to one of permanent retention by the federal government is a repudiation of Idaho's statehood bargain. Lands which at the time of statehood were anticipated to be a source of revenue are now largely unproductive. The subsequent actions of the federal land management agencies have reduced the ability of the citizens of Idaho to make a living from the land, denied the nation much-needed timber and mineral resources, limited the state's ability to fund education, and have led to poor stewardship of the land. The question of whether the property or supremacy clauses of the United States Constitution permit this unilateral reversal in federal land policy or repudiation of the terms of the State's Admission Act and Constitution is not resolved because no federal court has directly addressed the issue. However, the larger and more significant question is whether the shift from disposal to permanent federal retention of a large portion of the public lands in Idaho is good public policy today. This is not a new question. In the 1840s and 1850s, Illinois, Missouri, and several other western states repeatedly complained to Congress that they could not educate their children, provide economic opportunities for their citizens, and conduct their affairs as sovereign states because the federal government had failed for decades to dispose of the public lands that comprised nearly 90% of their lands in their states. However, these western states banded together and succeeded in compelling the federal government to dispose of their public lands. Examples of federal inefficiency and mismanagement abound. These difficulties are not attributable to the efforts of capable federal employees, but are instead symptomatic of the non-functioning federal land management policies and processes. For example, decades of misguided fire suppression policies, severe cutbacks in timber harvest and inadequate funding for forest restoration have exposed our national forests and our critical watersheds to the risk of catastrophic wildfires. Declining forest productivity and disease and insect infestation. In contrast, forestry efforts on private lands and on state lands, and even in other countries, are regenerating healthy and productive forests and thereby contributing to the economic prosperity. In fact, federal land management of public lands has proven to be costly, inefficient, and at times even dysfunctional, resulting in a resource that is both less productive and in environmental decline. The public lands presently do not pay for their own management costs and must be heavily subsidized by the taxpayer. Present programs and restoration efforts are underfunded, and given the size and scope of the federal deficit, it's likely that even fewer dollars will be appropriated for the public lands in the years ahead. Meanwhile, federal grazing policies are leading to a general decline in forage productivity and the ability of the land to support both wildlife and livestock. Forest decline is not a new issue. While these results are disturbing, they reflect a more systemic problem. Federal public lands policy is a jumble of inconsistent, sometimes conflicting statutes, regulations, and judicial pronouncements that have evolved over the past century. Funding decisions are uncertain and become ensnarled in the push and pull of routine politics. Appropriations are directed more towards satisfying political constituencies than in addressing the environmental and economic needs on the ground. Furthermore, federal land policies change with each new administration, leaving the land managers with no long-term continuity. As long as policy and funding decisions are left in the hands of remote officials in Washington, D.C., who have little understanding of the needs and desires of those with local interests who actually live, work, and recreate on the public lands, lands policy will continue to be buffeted by political winds. In contrast, bringing these decisions back to the state can better focus management on the most important priority, the proper stewardship of the land. Who better to manage the lands than Idahoans who have worked the land for generations and who treasure the great beauty of Idaho? Federal land decision-making is also burdened by an administrative process that needlessly complicates and delays necessary actions. The National Environmental Policy Act, for example, was enacted to ensure that environmental impacts were taken into account by public decision makers. Likewise, land use planning under the National Forest Management Act and the Federal Lands Policy Management Act attempt to make the process of public land decision-making better, informed, and more rational. While the intent of such procedural requirements is laudable, in practice, these procedures have become an obstacle and a stumbling block to effective land management. These problems have long been widely recognized. Indeed, even the Forest Service, in its own 2002 study entitled "The Process Predicament," said, quote, "Statutory, regulatory, and administrative requirements impede the efficient, effective management of the National Forest System. As long as they do, the Forest Service's ability to achieve healthy, resilient ecosystems and otherwise meet its multiple-use mission will remain in doubt, undermining public confidence in the agency," end quote. With all the procedural requirements governing activities on the public lands, many decisions are long delayed. The mandatory pre-decisional study and analysis, coupled with the post-decisional appeals and litigation, makes it almost impossible in practice for public land managers to be responsive to needs on the ground as they arise. The delays not only jeopardize the health of the lands, they also drive away investment dollars and employment opportunities that would otherwise be committed to resource rehab and development. Delays occasioned by these protracted decision-making challenges have often led to the destruction or diminishment of the very ecosystems sought to be protected. Rather than foster cooperation and early dispute resolution, the existing process actually detours collaboration. Given the failings of existing federal lands policy, how would the transfer of public lands into state ownership make for better policy? Well, folks, Idaho has a proven record of efficient, fiscally responsible management. In the area of land management on its own state lands, it has effectively balanced the multiple interests of all. Through existing state agencies, including the Department of Lands, the Department of Water Resources, the Department of Ag, and the Department of Environmental Quality, Idaho already has the technical expertise to properly manage the many resources, as well as the complex environmental and social issues related to the use of lands in Idaho. Multiple use and sustained yield have long been mandates in Idaho's land strategy, and Idaho has proven itself to be a good steward of the land. As America's leading political thinkers have recognized since the founding years, the closer decision-making is to the land and to the people who make use of the land, the more informed it will be as to the conditions of the lands and the needs and the desires of those who live, work, and recreate there. Accordingly, decisions made by state and local officials whose lives and livelihoods depend on the wise stewardship of these lands will better reflect local needs and desires. Improved land management will also serve the national interest in maximizing the economic productivity and environmental benefit of the land. Folks, this is neither a land grab nor a political stunt, as some have alleged. Rather, it is an earnest effort to draw attention to a federal lands policy that does not manage for multiple use, does not pay for itself, does not protect the land and the ecosystems, and does not meet today's challenges. Under a new public land system, the lands will remain public. We believe that the land should be retained in state ownership and control so that they can forever benefit not only the people who live and work and recreate on them, but for all Idahoans who seek an education for their children and an enhancement in their lives. Under this new program, Idaho public land use decisions will be governed by a commitment to clean air and water, healthy and productive lands and forests, abundant and diverse wildlife populations, and conservation of unique and sensitive areas. The intent is to set in motion a process by which, after decades of neglect and dysfunction, Idaho's rights and needs can be satisfied and our public lands can receive the stewardship they deserve. It's time to evaluate whether federal ownership of nearly 2/3 of Idaho land is appropriate and reasonable. This process must address the complexities of public land policies, and it must acknowledge the many voices of those who live, work, and recreate on the public lands. Mr. Speaker, debate is open.
You've heard the motion. Is there further debate? Good lady from Representative Wendy's Head. Good lady
19.
from 19.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to debate the bill.
Lady has the floor.
I ask you to vote no on HCR 22 today because committing the state of Idaho to the bold suggested course of action before we have taken the time to adequately study such an extraordinarily complex issue is premature. We will also consider forming a study committee to analyze this issue, precisely because it is so complex and so daunting. Let us give that committee time to do its work and report its findings before we make up our minds on how we should proceed. I know that many of us are frustrated with some of the federal government's management decisions on public lands. I know that we all want to see more revenue being generated and to see more jobs being created, to see our lands managed to reduce fuel loads and catastrophic fires. But it is not at all clear that taking over management of public lands in Idaho would achieve that goal. Combined, the Forest Service and BLM spend almost $300 million a year to manage public lands in Idaho for multiple uses. In a bad fire year, the costs will soar. Fire management alone cost the Forest Service $230 million in 2012. I know that many of us think that the state might be able to manage these lands for less, but how much less? These are numbers that would break our state budget. We can speculate on how management changes might reduce those costs, but that is all we are doing right now, speculating. These are complex issues and require careful study. I know that many of us have serious problems with the way that the federal government manages various things, but 73% of Idahoans agreed that one of the things our federal government does well is protect and preserve our national heritage through the management of forests, national parks, and other public lands, according to a poll conducted last year by the Idaho Outdoor Business Council. The people of Idaho, the constituents we are here to serve, are not clamoring for us to take on this burden. Are we so sure of our course of action here that we are prepared to state our legislative findings and level our demands, as this resolution so clearly does, before we have given the study committee a chance to do its work? I urge you to let the committee make its findings and report back to us, to give this very complex issue the careful study it needs before you decide that we should proceed down this uncertain road. I urge you to vote no on HCR 22. Thank you.
Is there further debate? The gentleman from 34.
Mr. Speaker, I have a question for the good gentleman from District 9.
Gentleman yield.
Gentleman yields.
Gentleman yields.
My question is, what happens to the various acts and federal laws, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Acts? How would they affect us after we took the title to the state land, which the federal government now has? Can you explain that?
Gentleman from 9. Gentleman from 34, remain standing, please.
Idaho would still be bound by the Clean Water and the Clean Air Act. We would not be under the National Environmental Policy Act. We would also not be under the Equal Access to Justice Act. But other than that, I think all the other environmental regulations that have been submitted, we would still be under.
Is there further debate? The good attorney gentleman from 16 has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am disappointed to see this resolution come before this body in this form. I am not necessarily 100% unalterably opposed to the transfer of some federal lands to the state of Idaho. We certainly have needs with respect to our existing endowments, and we have needs with respect to additional endowments that we might create. I find the legal argument presented in the resolution to be a little one-sided. I believe there is probably another side to that argument. If things were that crystal clear, we may not be where we are today. The other thing that disappoints me about the resolution reaching the floor in the manner that it has is that it essentially says we've made up our minds, we're right, but next summer we'll study the issue. I'd like to flop those two things around. I think we should study the issue and then decide where we are and what we think the best path forward is. The next thing that troubles me is the suggestion in the resolution that transferred lands may be sold to private parties. I think the last thing that I want to see, the last thing that my constituents want to see, is some sort of what I think could be perceived, I'm not calling it that, I'm just saying I think it could be perceived as a land grab to transfer lands into the hands of private parties. I do not think the people of the state of Idaho would approve of that. And finally, I'm disappointed in the tone of the resolution. It talks about a persistent pattern and course of conduct by the federal government in direct violation of the law, an oppressive and overreaching federal government, promises broken, a federal government that breaches and has failed to honor its promises. The state then, quote unquote, demands transfer of all public lands to the state. But then it asks the federal government to engage in good faith communication, cooperation, coordination, and consultation with the state. It reminds me a little bit of a petulant child who yells and screams at mom and dad and then says, "But treat me kindly." If what we want to do is move the ball down the field in, as the resolution says, with good faith communication, cooperation, coordination, and consultation, maybe we should have been a little bit more careful how we described that federal government, which is a government of us. I think my preference, my strong preference, would have been create the task force, study the issues, figure out where we are, make a decision, and then communicate with that government, which is us, the federal government, in a more productive manner. I don't think this is going to get us anywhere. I think this is going to hurt the cause. And I think there is, as I say, some reasonable basis to think the transfer, not the wholesale transfer, but the transfer of some lands could be a positive benefit to this state. And I don't think this is going to help us get there. Thanks.
Is there further debate? Good lady from 18.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to also debate against this resolution.
Lady has the floor.
Some of this may have been covered by my distinguished colleague next to me, but I was looking for an email. And one of the things that was brought up, and by the way, all of my emails have been saying, no, 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 let's not vote for this. So I have nobody has written me and said they like this idea. All my constituents would like to have me vote no on this. But I think the thing that I'm concerned about, that one of my emails brought up, was the cost analysis. Have we done a cost analysis of what this is going to do for our state? What's it going to cost the state? What's the financial return for the state? What kind of workforce will we need to cover all the things that the federal government does right now? Do we know how many federal employees are in there? In this handout from the good gentleman from 9, I don't believe there is anything about the workforce needed to cover all the things that the federal government does. And what about the cost of investigating criminal activity on federal lands? And will we be able to stop illegal marijuana growing? There's just a lot of things that I think have to do with financial return that I don't think we've thought about with this resolution. And if I remember right, too, was that I think that there was a editorial in the Statesman that said all the really productive lands that we can use for forests have been taken up by states, and that what we have left are going to be the ones that are difficult to get to. They're going to be low volume of board feet of timber and not good timber. So I'd like to see a cost analysis. I think that's what my good colleague from 19 was saying. We need a cost analysis and know what this is going to cost us before we jump into this. So I'd like for all of you to vote no. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Gentleman from 8.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I find I must rise today in support of this resolution. My district comprises some of the largest area federally administered public land in the state. And this would be very important to my district and to the state of Idaho. It has been proven through the great management of our Idaho Department of Lands with our trust lands, how well and efficiently that our state can manage those lands and turn a profit. It was mentioned that we can't afford the fire management. Well, that's because the state of Idaho does not manage fires. We put them out. Just recently, it came even more to my attention that today this is treated more like government land, not public land. More like the king's land, not public land. And that is because in 2008, for example, the new travel management plan came out on the Payette National Forest. Always in the history since 1908, any public access or public right-of-way was open unless deemed it needed to be closed for some specific purpose. Today, since 2008, all points of entrance are closed unless they deem that they can be opened. You don't even know. You just have to assume today, and I know many of you assume you can go anywhere you want, but that new travel management plan stated it is closed unless they say you can go there. I find Valley County today back in court trying to reopen 2477 public rights-of-way. Those are rights-of-way that existed prior to the reserve of the forest in 1908. We shouldn't have to go to court to get our access to our own private end holdings across the public domain, but we find we must. There's a lot of these issues that can be better resolved with state management, and this concurrent resolution is only a start down the long road of finding out how we can best proceed. But I stand today in support of this fine resolution to begin down that road. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Further debate. Good gentleman from 27.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's a few things that I'll come out of the chair to debate, and this is certainly one of those. I want to give a little background. Back in the late 90s, the then Governor Batt appointed 18 Idaho citizens from every stakeholder group to explore this very issue. And I was lucky enough to be chosen as one of the 18. But this was not stacked. Well, maybe some would argue that it was stacked. But we had everybody from Scott Bedke to the representatives from the then environmental groups. I don't want to mention their names because they've grown to be friends of mine. And it was a different day in state government. We had money. And this brash young cowboy came to Boise every Thursday for several months and lobbied your predecessors on this issue, that the state of Idaho should create a task force to look into management of the federal lands, because we had a management system that was working on the state land. The state of Idaho manages 2 million acres, and every year we back in the good years, we put in over $50 million a year back into the schools. That's dipped down now into the middle to high 40s now. But we had a land management system that was working on the state lands. And it doesn't matter. Well, let me talk a little bit about this 18-month assignment that Governor Batt gave us. He said, assume that the federal government walked away and tossed the keys to Idaho in your lap. What would we do? What would it look like? How would we manage? How would we answer all the questions that my good friends from the Boise Valley are asking us today? What would we do? And that was the focus of this group, to go and explore that. Every month we met someplace in Idaho and had a 3-day town meeting. Again, indicative of the times. One time we met in northern Idaho, and the 18 of us got in helicopters And we were all tied together with headsets, and we had a tour from the air of the extensive federal land, or the state land that we have in the north, with the federal land adjacent to it, up around, I believe it was Priest Lake. One side is state-owned, the other side is state-managed, the other side federally managed. It was a stark contrast looking from the air. We toured literally hundreds of thousands of acres in an afternoon in a way that we can't afford to do any longer. It was a very eye-opening experience. When we got back on the ground, we talked about the number of lightning strikes. We count those things. And as a storm or a front moves across, our side was struck just as many times as the other side, and we were able to count the frequency of fires, the size of fires, et cetera. The state-managed timberlands, the results were markedly different. And they left little doubt in anyone's mind. So how can we talk about this, my friends from Ada County, in a way that you won't head for the exits when we bring this issue up? Because we're all Idahoans. We understand the challenges before the state. And I would submit the following. We've had a pilot project, if you will, for 120 years. We have managed close to 2 million acres. We do that at a profit. You all know that the Department of Lands doesn't run the tightest ship in the world either. But at the end of the day, after we pay all of your expenses, we are able to put money back into the schools here in Idaho. And I believe that our success is scalable. I understand the concerns from the lady from 18 about, well, what do we do if we had to manage all the fire? The numbers that the good lady from District 19 mentioned are accurate. It costs a lot of money to fight fires in the West. But let's not take this journey just because of these big numbers at build out. What if our success is scalable, then what if we took the next, insert your number here, I'm going to say 500,000 acres just to start this conversation. But let's say that the state was able to take its land management model off of the state, overlay it over the adjacent federal land, and if it's been working on and these are interchangeable acres, keep in mind. If it's working on the one side of the lake, it ought to work on the other side. If we took the proceeds and dedicated those proceeds off of that 500,000 acres and dedicated that to higher education in Idaho, what would that look like? Let's say we took the next 500,000 acres and dedicated that to roads in Idaho. What would that look like? Let's say we took the next X 100,000 acres and dedicated that to the welfare, the health and human services that we provide. What would Idaho look like then? What would it look like if we did put more of that into public schools? That's the vision that I'd like for you to start thinking. Those are the terms that I would like you to start thinking in. What is the state of Idaho going to look like in the next 100 years? We need to start now, and this can be scalable. I read nothing in this and yeah, there's harsh terms, good gentleman from 16 in there. But if you compare where Idaho is compared to where the other states that came into the Union under the exact same enabling language that we did, the Dakotas have 10% federally managed lands in their states. We have 67%. The promises were not kept for the state of Idaho. If that results in harsh language and concurrent resolutions, then so be it. But I think that we can have this dialogue because it doesn't matter what standard you want to use to measure land quality, what biological results you want to use to measure land, whether it's rangeland health, forest health, water quality, watershed health. The state of Idaho's land management model is producing biological results on par with, if not better than, our neighbors that manage the federal land. So we can do this if we put our minds to it. The fires cost a lot of money. There's no dispute there. But we've already paid for the bills that we had fighting fires on state lands this year, and yeah, they were expensive, but they weren't excessively expensive. And to the extent that we can continue to scale our successes on the federal lands, and at the same time assure to the citizens of Idaho, as well as the citizens of the United States, the amenities that they've come to expect from the public land in Idaho, which is access for recreation and other purposes, to be part of the planning process. These are my vision of this in Idaho is that is open for all, that the amenities that the citizens of New Jersey, if you will, and that have come to expect from public lands in Idaho and the citizens of New Plymouth are the same. We can meet those. And at the same time, build up an infrastructure here in the state responsibly that takes us into the future. When the federal government gets its fiscal house in order, the path of least resistance will be back through the states. The appropriations to the states will be less. I don't know how much less, but at the end of the day, I think it will be less. I think the state of Idaho should be asking the same question that Governor Batt asked us as he gave us our charge. I don't want to hear anything, and I used to be able to do a pretty good Governor Batt impression. We said, but he didn't want to hear anything about the 10th Amendment. He believed in that, but this was not about the 10th Amendment. This was about and he said it's got to be managed under multiple use concepts, and the public's got to be in the middle of it. But what is it going to look like if they just toss the keys in our lap and leave? Now, I don't think that that's going to happen. But I think that if we have a solid plan that we can present to our own citizens as well as the citizens of the United States and show our success, build on our successes, that's my vision, and we need to be looking down the road more than just for the next fiscal year. We need to be looking down the road into the next century. This is the key to our success here in Idaho, is getting access to all of the land within our boundaries. I don't think we should be arguing about wilderness. I don't think we should be arguing about national parks or monuments. Many would. But that will be for a discussion maybe in 100 years. At this point, let's take the next 100,000 acres and scale our success on that next 100,000 or the next 200,000 and dedicate those monies. Our Constitution says we can't sell it. We can only sell it 320 acres at a time. And if we do, we have to give 95% of that money back to the federal government. We're not inclined to do that. So this is going to be retained in the public's hands, and we're going to try a different model that arguably is working and the success is scalable. I'm starting to slur my words, so Mr. Speaker, it's time for me to sit down, but I think I've made my point. This is worth trying. Thank you.
Thank you, good gentleman. Is there further debate? Good gentleman from 6.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the good gentleman from 9 yield to question?
Gentleman from 9 yield.
Mr. Speaker, I'll try.
Gentleman yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good gentlemen. I apologize for being tied up in committee and not missing the start of your presentation. But as I understand in my reading of the resolution is we aren't talking about a management contract. We're talking about, in this resolution, transfer of title. Is that not correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Is there further debate? Good lady from 35.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll try one more time. Mr. Speaker, I think what this resolution says is that we will state a finding and authorize Legislative Council to appoint a study committee. And that's, am I looking at the right one? HR 21?
Good lady, you're on the wrong one. We're on House Concurrent Resolution 22. You're one ahead of it.
All right. Well, my debate is similar anyway, Mr. Speaker.
Sounds good, good lady.
You know, one of the things that was said here is that the people are not clamoring for us, to do this. Well, they are clamoring for us to find more money to put in public schools. They are doing that. And one of the things that we do when we look at the possibilities, the study that our good speaker was talking of, that study, I was here, and it did show us that the state of Idaho does management of their land 7 times more efficiently than the federal government. That's what that study showed. We have studied this for many years, and there are lots of studies out there, but I was struck by that we do that much better. Also, I don't believe that this will hurt our cause. What I think this is saying is that we are, other states, some of the other western states are struggling the same way we are to manage and pay for our government and the needs of our people. And they're starting to say, wait a minute, federal government, we had a deal, and you have not kept your part of the deal. So, yeah, we're going to do a study, and we're going to ask you to stay with your deal, and we're going to ask the court to determine that. And I think that's where we're going with this. I most certainly think that it's long overdue, and that we should pass this bill with a very decided green vote, Mr. Speaker.
Is there further debate? Hearing none. Whoa, we're jumping up over here. Good lady from 26.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sitting here listening, I heard 2 distinct ideas about what this whole concept is all about. The first is, we want this land, you got to give it back, and we can handle it, and how mismanaged and everything the federal government has on it. The second individual talks about a vision of how to get it. I think when we were talking about this whole idea, and the lady from 35 also was talking about a plan to try to get these things done. I like the second one. I think most people, that's the way we want to go. You get that by the plan, not by declaring that you're going to be taking it over. That's all I have to say.
Is there further debate? For what purpose does the good lady from 19 rise?
Debate for the second time, Mr. Speaker.
Is there anybody who wishes debate for the first time? Good lady from 9.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Excuse me very much. This is something that we have studied for many years, as our good speaker stated. My constituents are asking for this, and they have asked for this for years. In rural Idaho, we have had the experience of dealing with the federal government as a neighbor, and they are the worst neighbors that you could have, with their weeds, their insects, their disease, and then their wildfires. And the city of Boise experienced a little of that benefit last year with the unhealthy air. We in rural Idaho have suffered for this for years and years. It has depressed our economies. It's destroyed a lot of our communities. And one of the reasons are the federal laws and rules. They are so conflicted. It is incredible. If you ever looked at a schematic, you would be amazed. The Forest Service rules conflict with the BLM rules, which conflict with NEPA. It is such a process-driven thing. It's very easy for outside groups to sue the federal government. And my dear friend, who was a chief of the Forest Service a few years back, described it very, very well. He called it the paralysis of analysis, and that is exactly what NEPA is. And it costs so much money. The federal taxpayers, every one of you and every one of your constituents, pay for this. As we watch our federal land go up in flames, we watch our state wildlife be burnt up, all their habitat disappearing, and our communities suffer for this. This is a long time coming. Idaho is a sovereign state. We are not a child. We are equal to every other state in the Union, and we should be treated as the same. Idaho is not a playground. It is a state, and our citizens should be given exactly the same equal treatment as any other citizen in the United States and their states. I would urge you to pass this. Thank you.
Is there further debate? For the first time. Good gentleman from 10.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good ladies and gentlemen of the body, I rise to debate in favor of this resolution.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, first off, I just want to applaud the efforts of the good gentleman from District 9 and all the co-sponsors of this legislation relating to the transfer of title for Idaho's public lands. Idaho's lands are near and dear to my heart, and to be very honest, I have seen in my short lifetime our lands management run off the track. I think that this is a big picture issue, and I firmly believe that as with most issues that come before this body, like other pieces of legislation, that Idaho can outmanage anything that the federal government can try to manage, especially when it comes to our public lands. I think the time to act is now to gain control back of our public lands, and I would also submit to you that if you do not think that there will be a positive fiscal impact from this happening to our state, you need to look no further than the state of North Dakota. You know, I'm originally from Salmon, Idaho, born and raised. And the last time that I went back to Salmon, Idaho, half of my friends were missing out of that town. And you know the reason why? Is because they couldn't find a good job up there and a good wage to make a decent living for their family. And where did they all go? They went to North Dakota. Well, what's in North Dakota? Well, North Dakota has control over their own lands, as has been mentioned in this body today. That, to me, is a telltale sign that if Idaho can gain the control back for their public lands, that we would improve the economy of the state, our schools would get more funds, and I think that we wouldn't have the transportation problems that we have today. The wages in North Dakota have skyrocketed, the taxes have been reduced, and the schools do have adequate funding in that state. I've done the research on this. And, you know, there has been some very good points made in this body today about being hesitant because we're not sure what the study is on our management of our lands. I think there was a good lady in this body that had said that Idaho manages land 7 times better than the federal government does. That is an amazing figure to me. Now, I know it's a little risky to go out there and do this, but, you know, I think that if we leave the ship in the harbor, then we will never find out what's out of that harbor, and I think that we need to take a little bit of a risk and move forward with this. I wholeheartedly submit to you that I support this motion, and quite frankly, I'm a little surprised that we haven't done something like this in the past. And I'm glad to be a part of this body now that is moving this motion forward, and I urge your green light on this legislation. Thank you.
Is there further debate for the first time? Good lady from 5.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and ladies and gentlemen. I guess I do need to weigh in just a little bit on this issue. It certainly is one that has come up over and over again through the years, and I was here a few years ago when the report of the Federal Lands Task Force was presented in this body, and hadn't realized our good speaker was part of that. But I do have a slightly different perspective on it, and I think that to one extent it probably is true that the federal government isn't living up to its promise dealing with funding. Now, in 2012, we did get about $26.5 million from the federal government that went out to counties to pay for issues related to having the federal lands in those counties. The 1908 law, which gave states or counties a share of the harvest proceeds, has been more shaky in recent years just because of the nature of the harvest. But I'd just like to give you a perspective that wasn't from a helicopter, but I've done considerable hiking in the lands around the part of the state where I live, and you see quite a difference as you move from those that are privately owned and totally managed for profit to the state lands and to the federal lands. And frankly, from my perspective, when you get to the federal lands, you see something wild and beautiful that's there for all of us to enjoy. On state lands, whether the management is best practice or not isn't for me to say, but I think the harvest is a little frequent of the timber to resemble best practices. As I say, there are people who are probably better experts than I in that. But I do know that when you get up to the lands that are left more wild, you see more pure waters that you would actually feel somewhat comfortable drinking and enjoying. And so there's quite a difference there. I would really like to see an analysis of the cost benefit that's very thorough when you consider not only the fire suppression, but the cost of law enforcement on these lands, as well as some of the payments that we do get from the federal government, and see how all that would stack out. But I think the big fact that looms in my mind is that I feel that it would be highly unlikely that we could sustain a court challenge to take over these lands.
Is there further debate for the first time? Hearing none, is the good gentleman from 23.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Speaker. I rise to debate in favor of this, and I'll give you a couple of quick examples. I represent a county called Hawaii County, and over there they're having a great deal of problem with their grazing permits being renewed. And it's all because we don't own the ground. BLM, I went on tour last spring early, well, it was late spring, into that area there, and we had 10 different agencies of the state of Idaho and the federal government with us, and was exploring the possibility of helping those range lands that the ranchers use over there to become better. And we thought everything was on the go to accomplish that. Guess what happened? Because BLM is scared of a lawsuit from the environmentalists, they ruled against renewing many of those permits and reduced them, in some cases, over 40%. Ladies and gentlemen, those ranchers can't survive over there on grazing permits that have been reduced by over 40%. That means that a lot of those folks are going to go out of business. And why did that happen? Because the federal government is making unreasonable requests. And during that particular time, I visited with those folks. I looked at the federal government and asked them this question in a meeting just here 3 months ago down at Murphy. And I said, how can you accomplish for that ground what you want to accomplish for that ground in trying to make the grazing better on those public properties without these ranchers? You know what their answer was? Said, we can't. And yet they're willing to trim the permits back to the point where the ranchers won't be there to help them. Now, they make some crazy rules and regulations that need to be overcome. Guess what the ranchers in Hawaii County have done? They have petitioned BLM because they didn't comply with a couple things to change their ruling, and I don't think they're going to be successful on that basis. They have also done this. They have sent to me, and I believe those folks that help represent that area may have got a copy of it too, but it's a resolution requesting federal transfer of public lands from the Cattlemen Association in Hawaii County. And they stated many of the same things that was stated on the resolution here. Be it, ladies and gentlemen, whether we like it or not, if we don't gain control of these lands, guess what happened last summer that prompted me even to think more about this? Look at Elmore County, the northern part of Elmore County. And the good gentleman on the second floor spent time over there just like I did when that fire was coming raging over the mountains and threatened the good city or little village of Featherville. And all of that was accomplished because the federal government hadn't done a good job of fire suppression and letting the land be logged like it should be logged. And guess what happened? through the years. We lost our logging industry at Horseshoe Bend. We lost our logging industry at Mountain Home. Lost our logging industry up at Fairfield, all through that area. And we were not allowed to go in there and do what we needed to do. Every place where the state of Idaho has forest ground, I've seen the pictures. The fire burns up to the edge of that ground and goes out because we have taken care of the forest properly there, and the undergrowth is controlled, and the fires are not encouraged to keep on burning because of the undergrowth that's allowed to happen. This is part of why we need to get this back. It's for our survival. And I implore you to vote for this so that this study can be completed and we can progress towards this, just like the great state of Utah has under the leadership of Representative Ken Ivory. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Good lady from District 19. Good gentleman from 1.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Everything's been said. However, I do live at Priest Lake, and I've been there all my life, and it's a perfect example. I would invite anyone here to come to my home. We can get in the boat, go down the middle of Priest Lake. To the west, you have all the federal forest land, and to the east, you have Priest Lake State Park. And it's not just obvious, it's very apparent what the difference in management styles are. But you know, I'm not going to stand up and debate language. People get frustrated, and I think that's why language sometimes becomes more and more stern. But many of my friends have worked for the federal government in the Forest Service up at Priest Lake, and they've worked those federal lands, and they're good neighbors. They're good Idaho neighbors. And they'll be the first to tell you that their frustrations are shared with me. And I always am a little bit hesitant to blame the federal government for the problem, because the federal government, I believe, in those management areas would like to do more than they can right now also. But they're stopped from doing that by lawsuits and by different things that happen. You have water quality issues in those areas. You have watershed issues, all the things that we talk about, protecting the water, and environmental groups that I agree with, that we need to preserve those resources. However, when you do have a catastrophic fire that's caused because of either an invasive species that came in, it's very, very flammable, or it's caused because of a disease, whether it's be bark beetle or whatever it is, well, the federal government can't even get in there and manage those invaders, those beetles. I mean, they can't get into the areas because the roads have all been removed. And it's impossible to do that from the air because you can't use the chemical treatments that are required to contain invasive species. So I think that our federal members of our society that live within our boundaries of our state would be the first ones to come to committee and to complain about their lack of ability to manage. I do share with the gentleman from 16 that the language is language, and it does have a meaning, but I read something different here. I read frustration in this, and I don't think the federal government's going to punish us for being frustrated, because I think that our federal partners where I live are also frustrated, and they probably would agree with this language also. So to me, the invitation is open. Come to my home. I'll show you wildlife. I mean, the good gentleman, our speaker, spoke of what he saw from the air. I'll show you what it is from the ground, to see the herds of elk and the forests that have been managed properly. There's no clear cuts on state land. It's really quite remarkable what can be done. And it's also remarkable how much pride. I live on a piece of deeded land, but the pride that we have of our state land there, it just doesn't exist on the federal side. I live on the federal side, but I take pride in what happens on the state side because that's our land. And I guess the federal land is our land too, but it doesn't feel the same. So that invitation is extended to anyone here. Come see for yourselves. It's very obvious. I don't blame the federal government. I think they do the best they can. But I know that we can do better. And I'm also involved in firefighting. I'm very worried about the time is of an essence to get something done, because we have the most beautiful park in the Priest Lake State Park, perhaps in the entire state. And we are going to lose that to wildfire eventually, because these fires get so hot on the federal grounds that it's going to transfer onto those state lands, and I think we'll lose that. So, Mr. Speaker, I would encourage everyone to look beyond the language a bit and understand that this is an important step forward to try to perhaps take small steps and take some small management opportunities as we see them. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there further debate for the first time? Is there debate for the second time? Good lady from 19.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just wanted to clarify that we are dealing with two very distinct concurrent resolutions here. There's been a lot of debate that we do need to support a study group, which I very much agree with, but I still am having a lot of trouble with the very strong suggestive language in HCR 22. I don't think it's appropriate because we haven't done studies for quite some time, as has been indicated by the gentleman from 27. And so I urge you to maybe take a step back here on 22 and let the study committee do their job, and then we can come out with strong language if we feel that that's necessary. Thank you.
Is there further debate for the second time? Hearing none, would the good gentleman from 9 care to close?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and great debate. You know, I have to say that we probably wouldn't even be here debating this if the federal land management agencies were allowed to do their jobs and be managers of the resource, you know, which hasn't been the case for a long time. But some of those groups who oppose this resolution are the very groups that are responsible for the federal government not being able to manage the resource. They use the process of the environmental assessment, and once the decision has been made, then they appeal the decision, and if that doesn't work, then they file suit. And by the time you get through the process, we're talking about a resource here that is expendable. I mean, that doesn't last forever. And if you can delay the process by 10 years, you've decreased or diminished or eliminated the value of that asset. And it's left then in the forest to add fuel for the next catastrophic fire in the next fire season. Well, folks, our state land agencies have a great record of resource management, a record that protects the air and the water and the wildlife and the forest and the ecosystem. And it's not under the same rules that the federal government is under. They don't have to go through that protracted process that the federal government goes through, and they can actually have people on the ground within months if they need to take care of those resources and to take care of those disease and insect infestations. Under state ownership, we would not, and I say again, we would not sell the land, but rather manage the resource for the benefit of Idaho. Our management policy would not be the same as what the management policy of the federal government has become, and that is to grow it, to burn it. Mr. Speaker, I ask for your vote on your yes vote on this resolution.
You've heard the mayor's motion. The question is, shall House Concurrent Resolution 22 pass the House? The clerk will unlock the machine and the members will record the roll. Bonnie. Has every member voted? Representative Rushi. Does any member wish to change their vote? Clerk will lock the machine and record the roll. 55 ayes, 13 nays, 2 absent and excused, the majority having voted in favor of House Concurrent Resolution 22. House Concurrent Resolution 22 has passed the House. Is there correction to title? Hearing none, the title is approved and the concurrent resolution will be transmitted to the Senate. Good gentleman from 13.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the roll call used in House Concurrent Resolution 21 be used, making possible the immediate consideration of House Concurrent Resolution 22.
I think you got that backwards.
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that the roll call used in House Concurrent Resolution 22 be used, making possible the immediate consideration of House Concurrent Resolution 21.
Good job. Good gentleman. 13. The motion is, shall the House concurrent resolution, the vote, is there objection? Now I'm getting confused. Hearing none, the roll call used for the suspension of rules on House concurrent resolution 22 is 48 ayes, 0 nays, 22 absent, excused. The rules are suspended and the House will now have before it House concurrent resolution 21. Good gentleman from 9.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to dispense with further reading of House concurrent resolution 21.
Is there objection? Hearing none, gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And certainly the prior resolution was offered to start the discussion, and certainly there is more study that needs to be done. And one reason that we brought the last resolution was because, and not brought it as code changes, is because we didn't know what code changes may be necessary. And there may be some, there may be none, but we need to have that study and do that. We need to gather all the information that is available. We need to develop a process of what we would do if the federal government actually dropped the keys in our lap, as the gentleman from 27 said. We need to develop the management strategies, and we need to know what we would do, and we need to determine what legislation, if any, might need to be drafted. With that, Mr. Speaker, I would ask, or debate is open.
Is there further debate? Hearing none, the debate is closed. The question is, shall House Concurrent Resolution 21 pass the House? The clerk will unlock the machine and members will record their votes. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change his vote? The clerk will lock the machine and record the roll. The roll call shows 64 aye, 4 nay, 2 absent, excused. House Concurrent Resolution number 21 has passed the House. Is there correction to the title? Hearing none, the title is approved, and House Concurrent Resolution number 21 will be transmitted to the Senate. The gentleman from District 14.
Mr. Speaker, ask unanimous consent that the roll call used for the suspension of rules on House Concurrent Resolution 22 now be used for the suspension of rules on House Concurrent Resolution 30, making possible the immediate consideration of House Concurrent Resolution 30.
You've all heard the unanimous consent request. Is there an objection? Hearing none, the roll call used for the suspension of rules on House Concurrent Resolution number 22 was 48 ayes, 0 nay, 22 absent, excused. The rules are suspended, and the House will now have under consideration House Concurrent Resolution number 30. Good gentleman from District 27.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I get started, point of personal privilege.
The gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good ladies and gentlemen of the House. Representative Henderson wishes to report that he is doing well. He was discharged home from the hospital today, and he is in his apartment now resting and entertaining his new friend, his Foley catheter. So he is doing very well, and wants to thank you for your prayers and thoughts and wishes. With that, Mr. Speaker, ask unanimous consent to dispense with further reading of House Concurrent Resolution 30.
You've all heard the unanimous consent request. Is there an objection? Hearing none, the good gentleman is recognized to open the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good ladies and gentlemen of the House. House Concurrent Resolution 30 has to do with pancreatic cancer. I will just read the last paragraph, and it says everything. It's a very simple resolution. It says, now therefore be it resolved by the members of the first regular session of the 62nd Idaho Legislature, the House and Senate concurring, that the month of November is hereby declared as Pancreatic Cancer Awareness Month in Idaho. Mr. Speaker, good ladies and gentlemen of the House, anything that we can do to rid our citizens of disease processes like this, I think, is a good thing. I ask for your support of House Concurrent Resolution 30. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Hearing none, the debate is closed. The question is, shall House Concurrent Resolution number 30 pass the House? Without objection, there will be a voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and House Concurrent Resolution number 30 is passed the House as a correction to title. Hearing none, the title is approved, and House Concurrent Resolution number 30 will be transmitted to the Senate. The gentleman from District 14.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the roll call used for the suspension of rules on House Concurrent Resolution 22 now be used for the suspension of rules on House Bill 318, making possible the immediate consideration of House Bill 318.
You've all heard the unanimous consent request. Is there an objection? Hearing none, the roll call used for the suspension of rules on House Concurrent Resolution number 22 was 48 aye, 0 nay, 22 absent, excused. The rules are suspended, and the House will now have under consideration House Bill 318. Good lady from District 5.
Mr. Speaker, I would ask for unanimous consent that we suspend further reading of House Bill 318.
You've all heard the request. Is there an objection? Hearing none, the good lady has the floor.
Okay, snicker now because I'm going to say it. This really is a housekeeping bill. This legislation corrects a cross-reference that has changed as a result of the repeal of Senate Bill 1184 through Proposition 3. Line 22 strikes the number 1627 and replaces it with the number 1024. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Hearing none, the debate is closed. The question is, shall House Bill 318 pass the House? The clerk will unlock the machine and the members will cast their votes. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change his vote? The clerk will lock the machine and record the roll. The roll call shows 67 ayes, 0 nay, 3 absent, excused. House Bill 318 is passed the House. Is there correction to title? Hearing none, the title is approved, and House Bill 318 will be transmitted to the Senate. The gentleman from District 14.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the roll call used for the suspension of rules on House Concurrent Resolution 22 now be used for the suspension of rules on House Bill 319, making possible the immediate consideration of House Bill 319.
You've all heard the unanimous consent request. Is there an objection? Hearing none, the roll call used for suspension of rules on House Concurrent Resolution number 22 was 14 ayes, 0 nay, 22 absent, excused. The rules are suspended, and the House will now have under consideration House Bill 319. Good gentleman from District 3.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to seek unanimous consent to dispense with the further reading of House Bill 319.
You've all heard the request. Is there an objection? Hearing none, the good gentleman has the floor to open the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good body. This is a very simple bill also. The school districts currently are expected to invest 2% of the value of their buildings in building maintenance. In the average district, the school district puts 1.5% of that budget into the coffer, and the state provides 0.5%. This bill simply states that if the district share can be spent simply says that 2/3 of the district share can be spent at the school's discretion as long as these funds are not part of the maintenance levy or there are no unaddressed building safety issues. This passed unanimously in committee, and there's no known opposition. I would ask for a green light. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Hearing none, the debate is closed. The question is, shall House Bill 319 pass the House? The clerk will unlock the machine and the members will cast their votes. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change his vote? The clerk will lock the machine and record the roll. The roll call shows 68 aye, 0 nay, 2 absent, excused. House Bill 319 has passed the House. Is there correction to title? Hearing none, the title is approved, and House Bill 319 will be transmitted to the Senate. Good gentleman from District 14.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the roll call used for the suspension of rules on House Concurrent Resolution 22 now be used for the suspension of rules on House Bill 265 as amended in the House, making possible the immediate consideration of House Bill 265 as amended in the House.
You've all heard the unanimous consent request. Is there an objection? Hearing none, the roll call used for the suspension of rules on House Concurrent Resolution number 22 of 48 ayes, 0 nay, 22 absent excused. The rules are suspended and the House will now have under consideration House Bill 265 as amended. Good gentleman from District 14.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that we cease the reading of House Bill 265 as amended in the House.
You've all heard the unanimous consent request. Is there objection? Hearing none, the gentleman has the floor to open the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, under current law, when a public entity performs a project, they have to retain the services of an engineer, not only to review the project, design the project, but also to review it when it's completed. What this bill does is allows a public entity, when they have a project that's less than $10,000, when it's performed by that public entity, and when it's performed up to standards, current engineering standards, and represents no material risk to public health, that entity can do that without retaining the services of that engineer. It's a cost saving to some of our highway districts and others, and I hope that you can support the bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Is there further debate? Hearing none, the debate is closed. The question is, shall House Bill 265 as amended, gentleman from 20.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I just want to declare Rule 38. My wife works for geoengineers, and she works a lot with the highway districts.
Duly noted, good gentleman, and I apologize for getting out ahead. Where was I?
Start over.
The debate is closed. Was I there? And the question for the House of Representatives is, shall House Bill 265 as amended, pass the House? The clerk will unlock the machine and the members will cast their votes. Has every member voted? Representative Hansey. Does any member wish to change his vote? The clerk will lock the machine and record the roll. The roll call shows 67 ayes, 0 nay, 3 absent excused. House Bill 265 as amended has passed the House. Is there correction to title? Hearing none. The title is approved and House Bill 265 as amended will be transmitted to the Senate. Good gentleman from District 14.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the roll call used for the suspension of rules on House Concurrent Resolution 22 now be used for the suspension of rules on House Bill 273, making possible the immediate consideration of House Bill 273.
You've all heard the unanimous consent request. Is there an objection? Hearing none, the roll call used for the suspension of rules on House Concurrent Resolution 22 was 48 aye, 0 nay, 2 absent excused. The rules are now suspended and the House will now have under consideration House Bill 273. Good gentleman from District 30.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the further reading of House Bill 273 be dispensed with.
You've all heard the unanimous consent request. Is there an objection? Hearing none, the good gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen, this legislation delays the implementation date of Section 49-1234 Idaho Code to allow the Department of Transportation and the insurance industry to coordinate their efforts to effect the legislation of last year. It also provides clarification of amendments on 2 technical issues. The main portion of this legislation is the new language in Section 3 at the bottom of page 2. When this legislation was conceived, it was designed to dovetail with the build-out of the Department of Transportation's computer system. Delays not anticipated and beyond the control of any of the parties are holding up the implementation of the system. Therefore, to prevent unnecessary costs, the effective date is being moved to July 1st, 2015. When the legislation was enacted last year, it failed to exclude golf carts. That is being corrected so that when you cross the street in your golf cart, you will not be stopped to check for your insurance. Mr. Speaker, there's no physical impact with this with House Bill 273. Therefore, I ask for your green light.
Yes, but is there a fiscal impact?
Mr. Speaker, there is no physical impact.
Okay. Is there further debate? He said physical.
Fiscal.
Hearing none, the debate is closed. The question is, shall House Bill 273 pass the House? The clerk will unlock the machine. The members will cast their votes. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change his vote? The clerk will lock the machine and record the roll. The roll call shows 68 ayes, 0 nay, 2 absent, excused. House Bill 273 has passed the House. Is there a correction to title? Hearing none, the title is approved and House Bill 273 will be transmitted to the Senate. The gentleman from District 14.
Mr. Speaker, point of personal privilege.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members of the House, we're doing so good that when we finish this next bill, I would like to go back to the third reading calendar and go till 5. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that the roll call used for the suspension of rules on House Concurrent Resolution 22 now be used for suspension of rules on House Bill 314, making possible the immediate consideration of House Bill 314.
You've all heard the unanimous consent request. Is there an objection? Hearing none, the roll call used for the suspension of rules on House Concurrent Resolution number 22 was 48 ayes, 0 nay, 2 absent, excused. The rules are suspended, and the House will now have under consideration House Bill 314. Good lady from District 30.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request unanimous consent to dispense with further reading of House Bill 314.
You've all heard the unanimous consent request. Is there an objection? Hearing none, the good lady from District 30 is recognized to open the debate.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I bring to you a bill from a united education committee to deal with the situation in higher education that is fragmented. Idaho's current administrative business model, under that model, community colleges in the University of Idaho have an option to utilize state support services, while Boise State, LCSC, and ISU are required to use them. But this bill is supported by all of those institutions because it streamlines the higher education administrative function for all of them. It allows the state board to pursue the elimination of duplication of services between the colleges and universities and the state. It allows the institutions to utilize the services of state government departments when it is most efficient, and increases overall accountability by ensuring consistent oversight over Idaho's higher education institutions by the state board, as required by the Constitution. This legislation will allow all of them to expand on the successful business practices already in place today at the University of Idaho and community colleges. There was a healthy and vigorous collaboration that occurred with this bill that includes a delayed implementation date of July 1st, 2014, to allow for any additional statutory cleanup that may need to be made. It has an 18-month notification requirement before the state board will allow any of those institutions to leave a state administrative service or function. This allows the state agencies time to adjust any business practices and impacts that they may need to adjust. And finally, it does have a sunset clause of 2016 to make sure the legislature has time to consider the effects of this legislation in future sessions. I want to emphasize that the existing governance structure of higher ed remains unchanged. This bill is about efficiency of administrative functions. And with that said, Mr. Speaker, I would like to yield my remaining time to my co-sponsor, the good lady from District 19.
Will the lady yield? The lady has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good members of the House. The good lady from District 30 has informed you well on what this bill will do, and just so you don't have any questions for us, no doubts in your mind, I'll clarify what the bill will not be doing by changing this legislation. The bill does not exempt our higher education institutions or the State Board of Education from state statute, federal law, government accounting standards, or board policy. Everyone must still follow all laws, including Idaho Code, and comply with established administrative laws. This bill does not impact or repeal the Board of Regents, which serves the same purpose as the State Board of Education, but exists only to govern the University of Idaho, which predates statehood. This bill does not exempt the higher education institutions or the State Board of Education from participating in the state's annual financial report, the CAFR, Consolidated Annual Financial Report. Generally accepted accounting principles require that the universities, as part of state government, be included in the state's audited financial report, and the State Board of Education will continue to direct the institutions to fully participate in that process. This legislation does not exempt higher education institutions or the State Board of Education from granting classified employees the property rights that exist in Idaho Code, nor does it exempt the parties from providing workforce information to the legislature and the governor. What this bill does do is bring all institutions under one system and policy body, the State Board of Education, and allows the board to provide solid, accurate workforce data with respect to the higher education system. This legislation does not impact Percy in any way, nor does it modify the relationships that exist with the State Board of Education, the universities, the Division of Financial Management, and the Legislative Services Office. The universities and the State Board will continue to provide information to both of these offices. In summary, this bill introduces an opportunity for real government reform. It creates a streamlined accountability system, provides entry and exit points to address known and unknown issues that may exist, and it allows for all parties to be at the table as equal partners to improve efficiency and remove duplication. With that, the good lady from 30 and I ask for your green light on this legislation. Thank you.
Hearing none, the debate is good gentleman from District 24.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the good ladies stand for question? I'm not sure in which order, maybe District 19 first, perhaps.
Will the good lady yield?
The lady yields.
Lady yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good lady, I guess I'm uncertain as to if you've indicated a good laundry list of what it does not do. I guess I'm uncertain here as to what it does do. Could you try to state that perhaps again in direct terms? I'm a little slow this afternoon, maybe.
Well, I did
from
leave
19.
that up. I did leave that up to the good lady from 30 to tell you what it does do. But basically, what this bill does is it allows Boise State, Idaho State University, and public colleges and universities that are not University of Idaho and community colleges to have a more streamlined process with the Department of Administration. So, for example, they already have their own processes in place for purchasing, so they wouldn't then have to duplicate the process with the state of Idaho. So it would save them significant amounts of money and significant amounts of time.
Follow up, Mr. Speaker.
Will the lady yield further?
The lady yields.
The lady yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good lady. What particular programs it is anticipated might be changed after an 18-month notification window? What is being contemplated here 18 months out as identified in lines 35 and 36? What specific services might be changed?
Lady from 19.
Mr. Speaker, may I yield this question to the lady from 30? I believe she's a little bit more familiar with those specifics.
Will the lady yield? The lady?
The lady yields.
Does the lady remember the question?
The lady does.
Lady has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Purchasing is a good example, good gentleman. Payroll would be another potential example. And in committee, they went through other potential examples that they have explored. Health insurance was one, mail services was another, where they look at where there's a duplicate of services and is it possible to eliminate one of those services. They explained it would be done on a case-by-case basis and only in the situation of cost savings, which then enables them to help our students potentially reduce expenses for our students and functions of the university. Would those then be adopted? But again, only with an 18-month notice so that any impact to state agencies could be dealt with.
Follow up, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from 24. Will the lady yield further?
The lady yields.
Lady yields.
So let's say, for example, with respect to health insurance, would an institution be able to withdraw from the state health insurance group plan with essentially by giving 18 months notice, and with the legislature or the Department of Administration, which manages that plan, have oversight on that process?
Lady from 30.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good gentleman from 24, that study has already been completed, and it was determined that was not in the best interest of the particular institution. So that was determined it would not be one that they would anticipate moving forward with. However, they would reserve, certainly the right to examine things as things move forward on a case-by-case basis.
And one final,
Gentleman from 24.
One final question.
Will the lady yield further? Lady yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good lady, would the legislature have specific authority to review these proposals as they come forward in the relationship between the institution and the state board?
Lady from 30.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Relative to the legislature's role, I believe it would be to review at the end of the sunset period. These things will be discussed over the course of the next year and a half, looking at a July 1st, 2014 implementation date, and then any agreed upon method for moving ahead will be undertaken. But I believe the legislature's oversight role, the state board will retain full authority over any of those decisions, but I believe the legislature's role would be to review this legislation at the time of the sunset expiration.
Thank you, good lady. Appreciate your answers. Thank you.
Is there further debate? Gentleman from 22.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the good lady from 30 yield to a question?
Will the lady yield?
The lady yields.
Lady yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good lady. As I read line 14, it says they shall have the authority and responsibility to direct and control such institutions in regard to, and then I drop down to line 19, land use, development, and construction, alteration, equipping, and furnishing, repair and maintenance of all buildings. Does that mean that when we set our budget for higher ed, the budget, when they make a specific request for maintenance, it won't be tied to any particular building? It will just be a dollar amount that they are requesting for maintenance, and they have the flexibility and the authority to spend that repair and maintenance on any project that they like because they have that specific authority?
Lady from 30.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A good gentleman.
22.
22, thank you. I cannot answer that specific question. What I can tell you is that there are circumstances right now on the university campus. There was a pipe cut going into the Fine Arts building not long ago. Potential flood situations that have been previously experienced where, because of the way we have administrative function oversight currently, and the thresholds, which is $150,000 currently, the university was prevented from acting with quickly to deal with some of these circumstances because they did not have full authority to deal with the circumstance. This would hopefully streamline that process so they do have ability to maintain their buildings directly. But as to your first question, I cannot answer with specificity.
Thank you, good lady.
Is there further debate?
Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to maybe offer some insight into the gentleman from 22's question.
Maybe during the closing.
Okay.
Okay. Unless the gentleman from 6.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good lady from 30, please.
Will the lady from District 30 yield to a question?
The lady yields.
The lady yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good lady. Does this bill exempt then the higher education from the statute and rules that bidding procedures on the Department of Administration are held to, such as competitive bidding, timely appeals process, etc.?
Lady from 30.
Mr. Speaker, a good gentleman from District 6, it does not.
Thank you.
Further debate. Good lady from District 5.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask the lady from 19 a question, if I might.
Will the lady from District 19 yield to a question?
The lady yields.
The good lady yields.
Thank you. The language seems so strong here, and so you seem to be the expert in what it doesn't do. We're talking about the exclusive authority and responsibility to direct and control. And line B under that says personnel, employment, and human resources. Could you give me a notion of what limitations there might be in how the university would manage their hiring and pay schemes and that sort of thing?
Lady from 19.
I may not be able to answer that specifically, but the lady from 30 may be able to. I know that, for example, the universities already have in place very significant HR departments and HR practices. And so this is intended so that they don't have to then duplicate that in the state, on the state level. So when they're making hiring decisions at the university, then they don't have to then go through the state as well. May I yield that to the lady from 30 also, Mr. Speaker?
Will the lady yield?
The lady yields.
Lady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good lady from District 5. One example that was presented to us was payroll. For example, it is all handled at Boise State through a separate system, but they have to employ 1.5 full-time positions to then re-enter all of that information into the IPOP system for a duplication of services. That is one potential example of something, of a duplicated service that may be eliminated again with sufficient notice.
Is there further debate? Good gentleman from District 10.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the good lady from District 30 yield to a question, please?
The lady yields.
The lady yields.
The lady yields.
Thank you, good lady from District 30. My question relates to, in this piece of legislation, it talks about the insurance coverage and risk management set forth by this board. That is very complicated. Those are very complicated issues, and risk management certainly falls in that same category. And, you know, it concerns me a little bit when it says that down here on line 24, the state board's authority set forth in this section is not subject to control or supervision of any other state department. That also would include the Department of Insurance. So my question is, if we're not going to see any reporting on this until 2016, you know, I guess that worries me a little bit. Was that matter covered in committee at all?
Lady from 30.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good gentleman from
10.
10, thank you. Only to the extent that this streamlines the process under risk management circumstances. And again, the State Board will have full authority and oversight over specific circumstances, and then we have it at the 2016. If I can look to my notes here, the example I listed earlier, where there had been a breach of some sort with the construction of the Fine Arts Building, was an example of where the risk management handled it in a way that the university was not able to fully recoup the expenses of the loss. And so there are some circumstances where they would like to be able to just streamline that service and, well, have it be more streamlined.
Is there further debate?
Mr. Speaker.
Good gentleman from District 6.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the good lady from 30 yield again, please?
The lady yields.
The lady yields.
Lady yields.
I just got a question on mentioning a payroll controller, et cetera. Isn't the controller's data what we use in LSO and DFM for developing our budgets, et cetera? Is there going to be an analysis of a group, when these are analyzed, of a big enough issue so we know all of the implications and complications, or is it just going to be as it affects the education? Because it seems to me that we're all intertwined together.
Lady from 30.
Mr. Speaker, good gentleman from District 6, I would agree with you. These are very...
Will the gentleman remain standing during the questioning and answering?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good gentleman. There's no question. This is complex. And those are the reasons, those are the very reasons why this bill came forward as it did, to make sure that all potentially impacted parties are at the table to address the very kinds of circumstances that you have mentioned.
Gentleman from 6.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good lady. So then this is supported by the Department of Administration.
Will the lady yield further?
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. This has been a long day.
I assumed implicit in that question was, would she yield as well?
She would. Would she yield, please?
And she will. Good lady,
Thank you.
you have the floor.
So with all these complexities, good lady, has this bill been vetted with administration and the Comptroller's Office and the Governor's Office, DFM, and all the other people that could be tied into this?
Lady from 30.
Mr. Speaker, good gentleman, it has. I met personally with Director Luna over this bill, and the Comptroller's Office testified that they are committed to moving forward in a spirit of cooperation with this. The State Board testified in support. All of the institutions of higher education are in support. I believe, as the good sponsor mentioned in committee, he said it is sausage, but it is good sausage.
Thank you, good lady.
Is there further debate? Gentleman from 24.
Well, Mr. Speaker, would the good lady stand for yet another question?
Which good lady?
From 30.
Would the lady from District 30 yield to a question?
The lady yields.
The lady yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, good lady. What is the meaning of the term exclusive authority in line 13 and 14? Are we ceding authority to the State Board that it does not currently have in this language?
Lady from 30.
Mr. Speaker, good gentleman from 24, I do not believe so, but I cannot answer that with 100% certainty.
One follow-up.
Gentleman from 24.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good lady. And again on
will
line...
the lady yield?
The lady yields.
Thank
lady
you, Mr.
yields.
Speaker. And again on line 23, the words, any other matter as provided by law, what specific parts of Idaho statute is that referred to, or is it anticipated would come under that?
Lady from 30.
Mr. Speaker, good gentleman, I would say it's any other matter as provided by law. That's the best I can answer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, good lady.
Is there further debate? I don't think that there was any negative debate there. So the debate is closed. The question is, shall House Bill 314 pass the House? The clerk will unlock the machine and the members will cast their votes. Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change his vote? The clerk will lock the machine and record the roll. The roll call shows 53 aye, 15 nay, 2 absent and excused. House Bill 314 has passed the House as a correction to title. Hearing none, the title is approved and House Bill 314 will be transmitted to the Senate. Without objection, the House will now advance to the 15th order of business, announcements. Are there announcements? The clerk may read.
Following are the Standing Committee meeting announcements for tomorrow morning. Education Committee will not meet tomorrow morning. DeMordaunt Chairman. Health and Welfare Committee will meet tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. in the Lincoln Auditorium. Wood Chairman. Revenue and Taxation Committee will meet tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Collins, Chairman. State Affairs Committee will not meet tomorrow morning. Lurcher, Chairman. and Transportation and Defense Committee will meet at 8 a.m. East Wing, Room 40, Palmer, Chairman.
Good gentleman from District 13.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Revenue and Taxation will meet at 8:30 tomorrow morning.
Duly noted. Good gentleman from District 15.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just an announcement, Judiciary and Rules is still going to reconvene after this meeting, so scurry down there as quick as you can.
Gentleman from 14.
Thank you. You may have announced it. If you did, I apologize. Education is not meeting tomorrow.
That's correct. Education Committee will not meet tomorrow.
Gentleman from 20.
Mr. Speaker, Transportation has been moved to upon adjournment.
Transportation Defense upon adjournment.
Mr. Speaker, the Resources Committee is still in the middle of a very deep subject, so we will meet again immediately upon adjournment.
Further announcements. The House will now advance to the 16th order of business, adjournment. The House is at the 16th order.
Mr. Speaker, good Representative Van de Wilde would like to have a caucus meeting, but I say no. With that, Mr. Speaker, I move that the House adjourn until the hour of 9 a.m. Friday, March 22nd, 2013.
Mr. Speaker, there are people of my caucus who want to meet, but you want to trade? I second the motion.
You've all heard the motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it. The motion carries, and the House will stand adjourned until the hour of 9 a.m. Friday, March 22nd, 2013.
You was giving me a...
Welcome to Idaho in Session, Legislature Live. Idaho in Session is